A busy little introduction there to what promises to be a busy little series of videos for you. I had an email recently from one of my subscribers following my last video saying, you might think I'm stupid, but you talked about relays operating your frog polarities and your LED lights on the Mimic board. And I didn't get that. I still use a track connector to get my wires onto the track, and I don't get all of the switches and relays and frogs and that kind of stuff, so you probably think I'm a bit daft, but that's where I am. Well, first and foremost, Steve, you're not mad, you're not daft. We've all been in that place where there are things we just don't get. Some of us have learnt by trial and error mostly, and perhaps it's the modelling community is all about those of us who know stuff learning from other people who don't know stuff, and it works two ways. There are things I don't know that I'm learning off other people, and there are things I know perhaps I could show somebody else, and this series is part of that. So Yarslow, if you've been around the channel for some time, you'll know that Yarslow covers about 40 square meters. It has 4 independent stations. There is a double track main line, a semi-independent city terminus. There are 3 sets of fiddle yards dotted around the layout, 10 controllers, 14 track sections, and I can get 6 guys out here with all things to do to run the layout. Now that's all done with 7 different basic circuits in terms of electrics. So you don't need an awful lot of technical knowledge. This is very basic. It's basic because I need to understand it if it goes wrong, and I don't do high-level electronics. The layout is DC analog, and as far as I'm concerned, that works for me. That's what I know, so that's what I stick to. So what are these 7 circuits? Well, there's going to be 8 videos because I'm going to add one on the front all about soldering. So this is the first thing you need to know, how to solder something to something else, a wire to a switch, a wire to track, 2 wires together, whatever it happens to be. Soldering is so important. So we'll cover off soldering, and within that I'll cover off the sort of tools that you need in order to do model railway electrics that you don't normally have in your toolbox if you're doing track laying or ballasting or making a tree or something. So 1 or 2 little bits of specialist tools, nothing complicated, nothing difficult and fancy, nothing you can't get hold of on an online site or in a decent model shop. Okay, so soldering is where we start. We're then going to go on to looking at getting power to your track, really important. Then we'll talk about isolators. So on a DC layout like mine, you run a train, an engine onto a section of track, you flick a switch and it stops, it won't work. How does that work? How do you do that? I'll show you. The 4th one is operating your points using point motors. There's a number of point motors around. I'll talk about solenoid point motors because they're the ones that are basic, if you like. They're the ones that I use. There are a number of versions, but I'll talk about solenoid point motors, how you work them, and alongside that, capacitor discharge units. If you don't know what one of those is, don't worry, we'll cover it. They're not wildly expensive pieces of electronics. There is a video somewhere on the channel about point motors and CDUs. I'll just revisit it and package it back up and put it into this series for you. The next one is what happens if both you and I want to operate a train on the same section of track. So 1 piece of track, 2 controllers. We covered off this in the cab control video in terms of how you might want to, why you might want to do that. Let's talk about how you make it work electronically. The next one, and the one that gets everybody, I think, is live frogs. How do live frogs work? What is happening when we talk about changing polarity? What is that all about? I'll talk about dead frogs, live frogs, unifrogs, but I'll concentrate on live frogs and show how the changing of the live frog polarity works and why it's a good idea. Talk a little bit about LED lights. Coming back to the previous video, those LED lights in the panel, you change a switch and the light changes so that you know which way the point faces. That's a very useful thing to have, so let's talk about that. And finally, I'll talk very briefly about relays. Again, I've talked about relays before, but I'll revisit it and put it into the context of what we're talking about now. Okay? So 2 caveats really. One, I'm going to talk about model railway electrics from the standpoint of a 12-volt layout. That's what Yarslow is. If I can talk my good friend Colin into telling me how DCC works, I'll share some of that with you as well. But for the minute, we're talking about analog DC. What I'm finding is that as more and more information comes on stream about running a DCC layout, there's less and less information regarding running DC analog layouts. So maybe this is an opportunity to correct that. Each of the videos is going to be short, sharp and independent. You don't want an hour-long video that you have to wade all the way through to find out what a CDU is. I'll make them short and sharp. I'll try and get them out at a fairly rapid pace so that it all fits together and you end up with a series that you can dip into and dip out of. I'm going to call them the Making Yarslow series, and going on from these we may dip into ballasting, static grass, we may look at scatter, making buildings, painting people, all sorts of things that I do. Now I should say, right at the beginning of the channel, I did say I was not going to do how I do type videos, principally because there are many people out there who are better at this than me. But what I'll do is I'll get you started. I'll give you a basic technique. You practice, you look at how other people do it, and then you move on from there and you make your own skill set. But I'll at least give you a foot on the bottom rung of the ladder. Hope that's going to be useful. Thanks for your suggestions. If you've got any suggestions to throw into this as to how I do things, drop me a line at yarslowmodelrailway@outlook.com. Send me an email and go, Barry, can you cover this, or can you think about that? I may not be able to do everything, but at least I'll give it a thought, give it a go, and between us we'll all learn some more, won't we? Hope that all makes sense. I'll see everybody soon.